Hello, friends. Want to make sure everybody can hear me okay, and I want to make sure that you can see the presentation being shared. Both things are all right? So far, so good. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's just dive in. I am Percy Turner, so I keep forgetting that I have to kind of talk about myself a little bit here. So I'll tell you a little bit about me. We only have an hour, so I'll have to kind of pare down my life story a bit. But I am a master social worker. I was licensed in the state of Kansas for quite some time. I focus specifically in crisis. And so what that meant was I did a lot of crisis therapy. I focused on crisis observation and stabilization, which meant that communication was a humongous part of what I did. And it was kind of the cornerstone of whether we were effective as a team, whether we were effective in during shifting times and times of change and that sort of thing. And so communication and the chaos of change is really something that's important to me and close to my heart. And so hopefully I'll be able to provide you guys with some good methods and some good thought processes to communication during changing and shifting times. So here's our agenda. Here's what I plan on getting done with you all today. We're going to talk about change. We're going to frame it in three different ways. Change on the horizon, change with a timeline that is, it's not changing now, but it will at this point, and then immediate, and we call this like effective immediately change, right? And so we'll talk about those things. We'll also talk about effective communication and what that might look like. We'll talk about audience consideration. We'll talk about engagement consideration, and we'll talk about the different communication mediums that are available to you. And then we'll also talk about responding to resistance, and I'll kind of bring up a few things. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm not going to give you the keys to unlock that difficult staff member that you came here to talk about, right? We all came here with somebody in mind. How is it that we can get Jimmy to stop disrupting the staff meetings? Every time I say something, he's got to argue with me. I can't help you with Jim, right? I have to know him. I have to learn him. But this is kind of the beginning to some of that. And I'm going to be giving you some questions to ask yourself and some ways that you might be able to interact with folks who are resistant to change. And hopefully that will kind of spark the ability to affect change in that way. So be ready to be disappointed, and let's keep going. So framing change, let's start there. So first and foremost, one of my very favorite presenters, his name is Seth Bate. If you don't know him, you should become acquainted. He says that leadership is about affecting motivation and change in shifting times and times of change. And he says all times are times of change. So I want to be very clear that we are going to frame it in three ways, but things are consistently changing, constantly changing, all of the time. So the way that we're going to look at it is, the first one is change on the horizon, right? We're talking about changes that are coming in the future, right? We hear things like coming down the pipe. This is something that we think is going to happen. Maybe we've heard some whispers at the state level or higher. Maybe we've heard something. So we believe that we need to be preparing for this change, but we don't have hard dates right now. And we don't have a structure around this particular change right now. And we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to give you some pros and cons to communication around change on the horizon. Then we're going to talk about change with a timeline. So this timeline, the change isn't happening right now, but there's something with that timeline. And what we typically like is a preparation period, a period of grace where we're going from A to B, and then the limit set, right? Where it's no longer A, it's B, right? So that's our timeline discussion, and we'll talk a little bit about ways that we can communicate that effectively. And then our emergent or effective immediate change, right? So this is something that it's sudden, or it's kind of a hard line, but typically it's little to no preparation. This can shock, this even positive change, and we'll talk about that there's, in some ways, even positive change can be a shock to a system, right? And so we'll kind of dig through that a little bit as well. So let's talk about that change on the horizon. So what's good about being proactive in communicating when there's change on the horizon? Oftentimes change requires adaptation and intention, right? And that requires some time. So if change is on the horizon, there is a real great value in just stating outright, these things might be happening and we need to get ourselves ready, right? I had a supervisor a very, very long time ago that anytime she would attend all of the state functions, we worked with children at the time. This was a lifetime ago. I worked with children for Sedgwick County. And this person would go to every one of the state meetings, and anything that they said, she would implement. So if they said, hey, in a year, we're going to change our documentation practice to make it so that there's 48 hours before documentation is considered late, she would come back and next month we would be doing it, right? And in that way, whether the state decided to or not, there was value she saw in tightening up that documentation schedule. So that's what she would do, right? And so we were always ahead of the curve in this regard. And so that's a pro, being able to kind of consider changes coming down the pike, recognizing positivity in that change and implementing that, whether it ends up being something real or not. We got stronger as a team because we were able to kind of roll with change and we were always ahead. So if something did come, everybody else is being surprised. We've been doing it for 6 months. So it wasn't a big deal though, right? Communicating early and often just kind of builds trust. And that's what that story is all about. We knew that when she was leaving, as a team, we'd come together, and that was our ability to kind of follow and mirror what she was doing and be ahead. And it felt really good not stressing over the changes at levels we couldn't control because we trusted in our director to lead us where we needed to go. And so we didn't have to worry about what, like I said, where everybody else was just starting to worry, we were getting used to it. It was normal for us. And so those are some really good pros. Now, there are some cons depending on how things are communicated. In the future, change can feel very much like clutter, especially if there's no follow through. So I don't know if you've ever had those horizon conversations where, hey, we might be doing this in the future. We hear it once, we hear it twice, we never hear it again. So I've been stressing about, are we going to do this? Are we not going to do this? Is this matter closed, or is there a point where we're saying, okay, this isn't happening? That ambiguity can feel like clutter. And it can add to overwhelm, especially if you have staff that are beholden to the practice that might change. So if I have somebody that's documenting every single day and I say, hey, it's possible that we're going to cut our documentation schedule down to being 48 hours instead of 36 hours, and then I never tell you whether we're going to do that or not, every time I document, every meeting I have, I'm going to be thinking about it, right? You might have the opportunity to move on because this is, not something that you have to deal with. If I have to deal with it every day, then this becomes anxiety. And that can lose trust and that can become resentment. So you have to be very, very careful about follow through when it comes to this sort of thing, right? And in the future, change, it may not be set in stone, right? So especially if you are in a space that has had these issues before where we're going this direction, the last minute, we're not going this direction, right? We pull back for whatever reason. If there's a history of this can lose trust and it can add to frustration. So just be very aware that this is a possibility. So Carol says it absolutely correct. That time of not knowing, that crickets time where I'm supposed to be, I think this is right, but there's that ambiguity and nobody's saying anything. Nobody's communicating. That's a problem, right? And that becoming a practice could really lose trust with staff. So just be aware, if you are going to communicate change on the horizon, the big thing that you want to do is focus on your follow through. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between changing because you have to and changing because it's your decision, right? Empowering that change to be something that you've decided can take a little bit of that ambiguity out. Right. So if I see change on the horizon, I might choose to just change it. And so whether it goes through or not on that top end, we are going to do it anyway, because I see value in that. We as a team see value in that. So we don't necessarily have to be beholden to the whims of whatever regulatory body that exists. right? We can also see value in something and implement it because it's going to be better for us. So even if that regulatory body fails us, we are not failing our staff, right? We are taking ownership of the change. So let's move forward here. If we're communicating on change that might be, we want to focus on the tangible elements of that change, right? So if a policy is set to change or may set to change, consider just implementing the advantageous part, no matter what, whether it changes or not. So it's possible our new partners might want our documentation. They might want more documentation. They might want different documentation. And I or we or the board or the team sees value in adding those bits of documentation. Let's do it. Instead of framing it as these people want it, we have to change, right? Because even if they don't, even if they decide to back out of it, there's still value in looking at our documentation practice and ensuring that that practice is up to date and relevant, right? We also want to frame the commitment to that change as twofold. And again, I'm just kind of reminding us that we still have agency. So we can still decide, hey, this change is worth to us. If we know that more of this intentional documentation practice will be beneficial, let's frame it appropriately. And that takes the sting away from other people are telling us. How often are you in a position to either say or listen to people talk about how they don't have any power in this situation, right? Somebody else is saying we have to change, so we have to change, right? And so in that disempowerment, what else are we telling our staff? What else are we communicating if every time we talk about change, we're also a victim of it, right? So we have to be intentional about framing things that still allow us to have some power and some say-so, and seeing the positive or the value in some of these changes outside of just the idea that somebody else might be making us do it. Now, again, I want to be very clear, not every change is going to have a silver lining. But part of what we do as leaders, part of what we do as motivators is finding that silver lining, is showing that silver lining, and is empowering other people to look at it in that regard, that this is valuable whether they wanted it or not. It's a great idea to look at our documentation. There's nothing wrong with that, right? So the next kind of change that we're going to be talking about is this idea of change on a timeline. So the positive element here is to really put intention into our change focus. A timeline allows for inclusion. A timeline allows for decisions to be made by the team. Oh, go ahead, Annette. You have a question.
I do. And here's what it is. I know of a current scenario where we were told about a year ago that there's going to be this change X, we'll call it X, and then we've been told more recently that, work's being put into place to get prepared for change X. Although some of us that are very closely impacted by change X have no idea, nor have been asked for any input, or which would maybe include our concerns. It's just been said, this is going to happen. And I struggle to say anything because I don't want to look like I'm going against change. Although I feel like, you say in that last slide, it would be nice to know all those, what things can we prepare for now? Well, those of us who are going to be impacted by change have no idea how to prepare or to have any, like, to frame it, to have any peace about what's coming up, because it appears that we're not being taken into consideration in that rollout of the change, and not given any pieces of information from which to put ourselves at ease in how that is going to impact our work. Change, like you said, is inevitable. I'm good with that. I understand that. I'll accept it. It's just, it seems almost disrespectful that we're not giving this maybe a bit of piece of it. And since it's impacting us in a big way, that we might somehow been at least told that we may be asked for input, even if that's not planned, or just for the fact that, hey, we haven't looped any of you people impacted yet into this situation because we are still trying to figure out level one, base level ourselves. I mean, if that would just be, maybe said, maybe I didn't hear it, maybe reinforced. If that was said, it sure make those of us who are going to be impacted by change X feel just a little bit better. So I'm trying to do what you said. Like, if you go back to the previous slide, I'm trying to figure out, well, how do I have my thoughts be, right there. We'll go back. It was just, I think it was just the previous slide we had. So if you go forward, it says, change. Okay, and one more. Maybe it's one more. No, towards where we currently are. Frame shifting, like how to focus on what's tangible. How do we know how effective people work, considering, baby steps we could take to lead to the change? Well, how do any of us that are going to be impacted by the change, how are we able to do that when we're just told there will be change, but and we just feel like you can't just totally flip the switch
Right.
on such a massive change, what we perceive as massive change, I perceive as mass change. And so it leaves us who feel like it's a pretty significant change, kind of like, well, we're trying to grapple with it. Like,
Yeah, how do we do it?
Yeah, how do I do this slide? How do I frame my mind, look at it positive, and figure out what kind of baby steps to take when we're out of the loop?
Well, so we'll talk a little bit more, but one of the big things that I want to, number one, thank you for speaking up, because what Annette is doing is teaching the entire group what happens if we are not intentional with change, or if we don't take ownership of the change at the level that we're able to. So what's happening is Annette is saying things like, we've not been included, right? No one has said, hey, we don't know, which is a very powerful statement to make. If change is something that's on the horizon and we're unsure about it, but we know in the current landscape, certain things are not going to exist. We don't know what they're going to change into. We don't know exactly what the end product is, but we're asking for some space and grace. We're asking for some feedback. We're asking for, this is that active and open communication that would allow, and Annette, don't let me put words in your mouth here, but some of the things that you said there, I might feel a little more comfortable if we were included. If somebody were to say, hey, we don't really know yet, and I need you to sit tight, or I need you to focus on these 4 tangible things that are really going to be coming down the pike, and we don't know what the end result is going to be, but I can tell you how to get to tomorrow, right? I don't know, I can't tell you how to get to next year this time, or this program may look completely different, but what I can tell you is this is happening on the horizon, and we need to focus on your day-to-day at this point, right? Because the last thing we want is for people to feel disrupted at that day-to-day level. Because change on the horizon shouldn't be what stops us from today's work, right?
So should I just ask the person who I believe is going to lead that change, just come out and ask them, hey, can you
100%.
give me some idea of what this looks like?
Where to start?
Where to start?
That's perhaps the most powerful question you can ask in this moment. I don't know where we're ending, and they might not know where we're ending. Okay.
Okay,
right?
Thank you.
First bit, and thank you. I appreciate you asking. We'll keep moving forward, and I promise you we're going to continue having these conversations. And feel free to email. I believe Zane put his email in the thing there. So follow up with me and let's talk more about it. Okay. Having all of that said, and again, I appreciate Annette, because this has become a little bit of a collaborative. I hope everybody who heard Annette speak heard their own staff in her voice and heard the problems when we do not effectively communicate change on the horizon, because it's real, and we just got a great example of it. So okay. Carol in the chat says a fantastic thing. Getting the details of the changing would be beneficial to those who are fully impacted. I agree. And then this quote, if you want the change to happen in the future, we need to know the little changes, the increments to get to there, right? So what our job is in that horizon change is, here's the big thing we want to change. Now let's figure out the steps to go from where we're at to where we're expected to be, right? And we can start with that. That's why I said one of the most powerful things that Annette can ask is, okay, where do we start? Right? Whether I'm on board or not on board, I still need to know where my starting place is. Okay. So I was going to give you a whole example, but Annette did that much better. Annette, I'll slip you the 20 after the training is over. And we're just going to move. So let's talk about change timeline, because this is a little bit more defined in nature, but a positive element of this kind of timeline bit is you see that it gives staff that opportunity for inclusion. It talks about maybe decisions being made by the team, and opportunities for things like training, bringing people up to speed, bringing people on board. Framing that can be done in a whole bunch of ways. I'm going to give you an example. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to name the change, right? So here's the name. An external entity has put forth policy changes they expect to be in place by this time. Then we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna give you the increments. So here's the big change. Here's our incremental steps. The first thing we have to do if we want to get to the new policies, we have to have a clear understanding of our present policies. So we're gonna review those policies by this step. We're gonna do that for this reason. Then we're gonna rewrite. Then we're going to talk about how people who are impacted by this can assist in this process. Right? One of the big things that we do to disempower people is we make it seem like all of the change is going to be handled and then given to you, right? So we're going to look at the policies, we're going to review, we're going to do this at the top, and then you're going to be slapped with something new. And we're not going to do things like talk about the interim. We're not going to do things like provide training. We're not going to do things like have those open discussions around how policy actually affects. Everybody here is aware of the gap between policy and practice. We all have a policy that you can look in the books and go, hey, there's no way we can do that. So here's what we actually do. Here's how we actually meet our standard. And sometimes that's outside of the policy, right? So having that understanding of where the rubber meets the road when it comes to this kind of change is really, really important. The last bit that I'll talk about here is making sure that we are communicating progress. So we're not just giving a timeline and then never talking about it again, right? What we're saying is, hey, just want to let everybody know we are on schedule, or we're ahead of schedule, or these difficulties have come up and we're modifying that schedule. Right, but we're going to communicate our progress. We're going to communicate and recognize those milestones, and that allows for us to bring people along. Every milestone and every bit of progress that is there is an opportunity for discussion, is an opportunity for us to communicate with the staff and remind them this is happening, right? And so that they are empowered to move forward. The next thing that we're going to talk about is perhaps the touchiest bit of change, and that's that effective immediate, right? This can be unexpected, and often it's unavoidable. Now, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes this is a result of poor planning. Other times, like I said, this is an unavoidable thing. So one of the things we have to talk about is recognizing the loss in change. A lot of times when we have change on a timeline or we have change on the horizon, we have time to understand and internalize that and to deal with loss. When immediate change happens, typically what I hear from staff a lot is we're just expected to deal with it and move forward. Things that are effective immediately mean I don't get to have any feelings about this. I just have to run. I just have to go, right? So being able to recognize the impact and say straight out, hey, this is going to be a change. This is going to be a difficult change. Here's some space for us to talk about that impact, whether that's an email, whether that's during our next supervision meeting, whether that's during an all staff or something like that. But we want to be able to give a debrief to the effect of change, even positive change. And it was said in the chat. So obviously you guys are already pros at this. So Brooks says, no one wants to be the we've always done it this way person, but all change is stressful, good or bad. I agree, right? So oftentimes this is another thing that we tend to fall into. We see the change as positive. What's everybody problem? This is a good thing. We're doing a good thing. Why is everybody so angry, right? Because change is still stressful, even if it's good. So don't lean on expected results to determine other people's reactions. Hey, we're going to get a new program. It's going to do everything for you. It's going to put your time cards in. It's going to, get your documentation. It's going to take care of all of that. We should all be celebrating. There are going to be some people that go, but I was really good at the old program. So I'm losing something. Even though this is a great thing, I'm experiencing loss. And now I'm experiencing a little bit of feeling bad or maybe even embarrassment that everybody else is celebrating and I'm the only one like this, right? So who do I get to say that to? Because I definitely can't say, it feels like I'm ungrateful. It feels like I'm the person that's always complaining, but I am experiencing loss. And if there's no space for me to communicate that, I'll make some space and it's not going to be the appropriate. Right? So in the face of that immediate change, it is incredibly important to make sure that people have space to feel heard and people have space to be supported. Otherwise, they will feel helpless. So you have to be intentional, even during the great change that we know is coming. We still need to give some space and grace to those folks to be able to feel heard. Okay. When we are communicating immediate change, here are some tips. Make sure you are acknowledging directly what the change is, acknowledge the impact of that change. Again, allow for that space of grief, even in positive change. What you see as something positive, what you see as a lessening in stress or what have you, may be somebody else's bread and butter, right? So allowing some space for that and then communicating what remains the same. So this thing is changing. That doesn't mean everything is changing, because that's another thing that we tend to do, especially if we've gotten a bunch of change quickly. This concept of, okay, well, what do I have to hold on to? What's consistent, right? We have to remind people sometimes what's consistent, what remains the same, and reinforce that acknowledgement of loss. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the hallmarks of effective communication. So communication, just the act of communication is powerful. And I'm using Annette's example just to say one of the most powerful things she said was, if they just told us, if they just said, hey, we don't know, and we want to include you in that, we're just not sure, that would mean something, right? Silence is huge. So just the act of communication is important in the way that communication is framed and in the way that resistance is found, but also the intentional refining of the message. So we'll talk about refining change in the following ways. We'll talk about audience consideration, we'll talk about communication mediums, and then I'll give you, if we have a little time, I'll give you some building methods for content, okay? So the audience. There is an incredible value in figuring who the audience is, who's the message going to reach. So for example, one of the things, if you are communicating change, it is incredibly important to decide, is this something that people need to know or something that people need to do? Is this change for information purposes or is it a directive? Because there's a big difference, right? How connected is our audience with what's changing? So there are some things that we might be able to say kind of basically, hey, we're going to make sure we're changing our building open hours from 7:30 to 5:30. It originally was 8 to 4, so that'll give some people a little leeway. There may be some people who are mentally affected by this. There may be some people who are like, okay, business as usual, doesn't really matter, right? Being aware of how that impact is going to land, or being inquisitive about how this impact is landing for folks, incredibly important. Is this a decree, a discussion, or something in between? So sometimes when we talk about change, we talk about it in an inviting way. We want to have a discussion about change. Sometimes it's a decree, right? So the difference, and we'll get into this as we get it further into the presentation. I'll give you an example of this, but being aware, is this where I'm inviting discussion? Am I saying, hey, let's talk about, or am I saying this decision is made And if we're going to talk about anything, we're going to do things like I said in the last slide, which is like acknowledging loss. And so we're not talking about whether the change is coming or not, or whether we're accepting it or not. The change is here, and we're going to talk about the fallout of that change, right? We have to be aware of that because our language can be modified by that decision, right? What power dynamics need to be considered? There's a big difference between the communication of change from an executive director, the communication of change that's happening kind of around a horizontal space where all of our case managers, for example, are talking about a change that might happen, and something that's coming from a direct supervisor. There are power dynamics at play. So if you are in a space where you are in a position of power or authority and you are communicating change, how are you also communicating the approachability of questions? How are you communicating the who needs, where do you follow up? Where do you get that information? Oftentimes what ends up happening is we have one central figure that communicates change. And then they say, well, go to your supervisor, right? You have any questions? Go to your supervisor. What do? You go to your supervisor. What do your supervisor say? I don't know. I know as much as you do. I was in the same meeting that you were in. So there isn't a lot of support there. There isn't a system built for support, right? So if you are going to communicate change, one of the big things you have to do is build that support system. Don't send somebody to a supervisor knowing good and well that the supervisor doesn't have any information either, right? You have to empower these people. You have to empower that support system. We can't create a support system and then disempower it. Does that make sense? So around change, when we're talking about change, that's one of the big things we have to do. Is there any history? Have we gone through this before? Have we dealt with organizational trauma in the past? Because I'll tell you what, a traumatized organization may take the smallest element of change and blow it up absolutely huge, because I remember the last time you said it was just going to be a little thing and people started getting walked out of the building. I'm not getting walked out of the building this time. No way. Right? So we're not even reacting to the change on the table. We're reacting to the damage of the history that we've gone through with change. We might have to recognize that. Right? We might have to be aware and give some space and grace around the fact that, hey, we went through some really big, difficult times. And so now people are really like reactive and defensive when it comes to change. So let's keep moving. Let's talk about that discussion versus decision, right? So we have to know our purpose. When you are communicating, purpose is an incredible currency. So remember it, keep it in mind, write it down separate to the change, and every time that you draft, look back at your purpose. Is this doing what I need it to do? Right? So here's some examples. I want staff to know timesheets are now due at 11 a.m. Now, this is a change. It might have been that they were due the next Monday. Now they're due Friday. They're due before the pay period ends, right? Simple things like this. This may seem like a really straightforward, hey guys, from now on, it's this, right? But there may be a whole bunch of questions. What if I take Friday off? What if I'm late that day? What if I'm working in the field? What if there may be, what's the earliest that I can turn this in? So can I turn it in on Thursday and just kind of fake Friday's hours? How does that work, right? We have to kind of discover and discuss and give some space and grace around it. I want to invite people to discuss how to implement policies we've been given. This doesn't mean I want to argue about whether the policy is right or not. I want to talk about implementation. The policy's here, right? I want people to know that I'm new and I'm not here to destroy what's already been created. I'm here to support what we have, not tear it down, right? These are those purpose statements that we can put aside, and as we craft our message, we want to go back to that purpose statement and make sure that it's congruent with our purpose. So I'll give you an example of crafting a message that invites discussion versus crafting a message that talks about a decision. And you're going to see things like the word consider, and you're going to see softer language. You're going to see things that don't have dates on them and that sort of stuff. So here it is. I'll give you a second to kind of look at it and then I'll read it. The first one, that's our discussion. Now, some of you I call bullet point people. If you're a bullet point person, I want to apologize to you formally, because you're right now, you're scratching the inside of your eyelids. Like, this is horrible for you. It's way too much information. You're not getting to the point, Percy. What are you doing? I'm not a bullet point person, right? But there are some of you, and I love you because I need you in my life. So I want to be very, very aware that this is not how everybody communicates, okay? The thing that I'm doing here, I kind of drew it out so you could see all of the language here. So that first one, we're strongly considering a reduction in the number of spot checks required prior to a final process approval. So this first opening, it's very it's clear, this is what we're gonna do. This is what we're talking about, but we're strongly considering. So we haven't made a decision, right? Now, here's some pros and cons to that. The process will be more compact and have good oversight or less oversight, but it could lead to a surge in inaccuracy. So there's productivity there that we're trying to balance with potential inaccuracy. Pros and cons. These are discussion points. We're looking to form a committee. All right, so this is all discussion. We're looking to create something. We're looking to talk about it. We want to examine this process. We want to determine a pilot. We want to test it out. Right? So that's what that communication bit is. That's a discussion-based communication. My expectation is that people are going to express interest in this process. Does that make sense? We're going to talk about this. As opposed to our second one, we formed a committee. There's no discussion here. I'm telling you what's already happened. We've done this. It's going to do these things. It's going to determine an appropriate balance between efficiency and accuracy. There is going to be a reduction. It's not a decision anymore. It's already there. There's going to be a reduction in the number of spot checks, and the committee is going to communicate the numbers by this time. The new process is going to be trained by this time. This is all decision. So I'm not inviting any discussion with that second. Right? So when we're talking about inviting decision versus inviting discussion, this is a good example or a simple example of this particular thing. It's not a one-size-fits-all sort of space, but I want to be very clear about the language difference between the two. Okay. So here I just break that down a little bit more. I want to spend a little bit more time on that rubber meets the road. So I just broke it down, as you can see, and you'll have, I believe that saying we send these out. So you'll have this. I want you to read through it. The reason why all of my slides have words on them is so that when I'm not here to tell you stories and talk you through it, you have the information, right? There's nothing that I can't stand more than a fantastic presentation I can't refer back to. So all of the stuff is here for you to look at your leisure. So let's talk a little bit about communication methods, all right? There are a lot. And I'm going to highlight a few. I'm going to highlight some pros and cons. I'm going to highlight how we might communicate change and the good things and the bad things about that. So emails. There are a lot of great things about email. They're trackable. When communicating change, it's incredibly important to keep in mind what has been said and what has not been said. So emails are a great way to do that because you can save them, you can save the back and forth, you can make them formal or informal, and there's no inflection, there's no expression, there's no tone, it's just the message, right? And it can also be viewed and reviewed. So you don't have to, anybody here been in that situation where you communicate the same message so many times you kind of lose the meaning of it, right? I got to say it again, and I got to say it again, and I got to say it again. And did I say it this way this last time? Communicate in this regard, the email is the email. You can just refer back to it, right? Some cons there. Everybody here has at least 10 emails they haven't read yet, right? Unless you are a superhuman. And if you are, I shout out to you, please teach me. Right? But emails, it's so easy to become inundated with emails. I talked to a supervisor just a few days ago who said, I just got promoted and I was not ready for the level of emails that I get a day. As a staff member, I got maybe 2 or 3. Now, oh, it's a whole different world. I'm trying to interact with Outlook to sort these things because it's so much. It's so overwhelming every day. Right? It can also be difficult to follow. Anybody here ever been in that space where you have somebody who accidentally hit reply to all and it makes like a tangential conversation, and so now everybody is getting this private conversation between 2 people, and you lose the thread very, very easily. right? Another con, there is no inflection, no facial expression, no voice tone to give you context. Anybody here ever read an email and knew somebody was being a jerk? Right? You read it in their tone. You looked at those three dots, that ellipsis, and you went, oh, I know what you meant there. Dot, dot, dot. Right? These things are part of a problem when it comes to email. They are easy to misread and they are near impossible to retract. Once you send it, you've sent it. It's very difficult to pull it back. So if you send an email that was inflammatory in nature, whoo, good luck trying to get that back, right? You can't take it back and it's very hard to redefine. Teresa says, I recommend the inbox zero method for email management. My inbox is always empty or as close to empty as possible. You are, yeah. So I might have to talk to you. I got to learn about this method because I need it. Okay, so let's move to in person. So in person is something very valuable. Don't get me wrong. I love in person. In person gives you nonverbal. It gives you a wealth of understanding, tone, nonverbal stuff. You can redefine the conversation. Anybody here ever been in a conversation and had to backtrack immediately? You say something, you go, oh, no, that's not what I meant. That's not how I meant it. Hold on. Let me say it a better way. Let me say it differently. That's easy to do in person, right? You can monitor people's reactions in real time. When somebody does this, right? That's a big deal. You can do that in person. You can't do that over an email, right? You can convey that emotional content. You can display your reactions in real time too. That's also a con. Now, in person, there's no automatic recording. And in the past, we had this little thing, it was called COVID. It was kind of a, it was a deal a couple of years ago. It's not really a big deal now. We had precautions. And I hope that we're still kind of adhering to some of those things. We have to be intentional about purpose. Anybody here ever been in a conversation for 15 minutes and realized we haven't talked about what we're supposed to talk about? So now we got to reroute the conversation, right? Conversations can easily get away from you. There's a certain amount of anxiety in in-person stuff, and you can misread social cues, right? You can leave a conversation with another person thinking something completely different than what they intended, right? So being very clear, especially when we're talking about communicating change, we want to have some sort of record. We don't want to be, well, I told you, don't you remember? I said it out loud. Well, that's not necessarily the best way to communicate change. There should be a multi-tiered system of that change. So we should be able to talk about it out loud, but we should also be doing things like sending our emails or making a record of that discussion. Zoom gives us a little bit of both worlds. In Zoom, you can garner some context. In Zoom, you can record and save things. There's functionality for things like small groups. There's also a lot of features, right? The cons, you're able to hide. I have a whole nother training where we talk about when you need to take a moment for yourself in a virtual space. This is powerful. Being able to turn your camera off for a moment, right? I've been in meetings where I know good and well that my face is going to betray my emotion before I get to reel it in. So as soon as they start talking about the fact that staff aren't getting raises this year, right? You're not gonna see my face because I'm getting ready to make the worst stank faces at you. You know how hard I've been working? I'm gonna do all of that, right? And I know myself. So I'll turn my camera off, I'll mute my sound. You can do that in Zoom. You may need some privacy precautions, especially depending on the nature of the work that you're doing. It can feel impersonal. I'm sure that all of us have been in that space where you're in a meeting, you go there, your camera's on, and you're looking at a sea of black boxes with white letters on them, right? And it just feels like you're talking to nobody, right? So it can feel impersonal. And then there is Zoom fatigue. It's another fascinating thing. We spend the majority of our time, if I look at the eyes of the people who have their cameras on, some of you are looking at me and most of you are looking at yourselves. I don't know why we do this, but we stare at our own faces. Especially in the beginning when we first started using this, people were exhausted after sitting all day in Zoom meetings because they had Zoom fatigue. They're staring at themselves. If you wonder, how is that possible? Do me a favor, later on when you're going to get lunch, find a mirror and look at it for 5 minutes. Just stare at your own face. It's exhausting. Okay. Text. Most people have this kind of capability. There's quick and easy access. There's a record kept. Now, most of the time it's considered informal, but apps have a lot of different features, and they have organizational features, things like Slack, Discord. These guys have a lot of different features for you to be able to use, but you have to be a little bit tech savvy in order to use it. Now, the cons here, they are informal in nature typically. This is kind of changing, right? But if you've ever, like, I'm from an era where it was completely borderline illegal to call in sick via text, right? That's just not, you had to talk to someone, right? And so this may be changing. I'm not sure. I feel like it's changing in the space that I occupy. It is. There's a risk of fraternization. A lot of people, because they're used to it being so informal, you might be doing things like using text language. I don't know when your first professional emoji was sent, but I have had plenty of people in professional settings send me emojis over text, and I'm like, I don't think this is right. And a lot of times I have to kind of understand what those emojis mean, and I don't, because I'm 850 years old. So apps also have the ability to ask for money. They usually have like a free level, and then if you want to do things like save your messages or stuff that we're talking about is valuable, you might have to pay a little extra. And in the past, there were third-party concerns where people, you might get your information leaked because a lot of texting apps aren't entirely secure. That is also changing. So, okay, we've talked about this. The big thing that I want to make sure of is when we communicate change, we have to have a communication plan, right? If you just email one time, is that enough? Is that enough for transparency? Is that enough for, to make sure that everybody gets their email? Do you even know the email habits of the people on your team? Because I've heard very often people stand on that, well, I sent the email. Well, okay, well, the nature of work that I do, I don't really get to check my email until near the end of the day. So sometimes I don't get those emails. Sometimes the email is buried, so I have to go through and I don't get it as quickly. Are there other ways that we can communicate? So creating a communication plan that is multifaceted, that I'm going to send you an email, and for the people who care about that, it's going to be there. I'm going to send you reminders, so on and so forth. I'm going to follow up verbally, as Mary just said, and what I might do then is reference to the email. If I have, God forbid you have somebody that's working second or third shift, I might have to let them know in another more informal way, hey, I sent you an email about this. I need you to check it out. Right? These things, that follow-up is one of those communication plans that lets people feel included and makes people feel like that messaging is important enough for you to follow up with them and talk them through, kind of not just a read receipt. That's what I see. When I talk to people about communication, I say, well, I put a read receipt on it. Well, I saw you saw it. Yeah, okay, but you don't know what that context was. Right? Especially if you work in where you're dealing with other people or you're dealing with other work. I got my email in the background. I clicked on it. Something happened over here. I'm doing that work that I'm supposed to be doing. And so I didn't get to read this message in its entirety. So you got a read receipt, but I didn't read it. I opened it and then some other stuff happened. These things happen. So being able to follow up, incredibly important. Thanks, Kristen. Have a great day. So let's talk about resistance. Change is always difficult. All change is difficult. Good change is difficult. Right? So when we encounter resistance, one of the things that we can fall into doing is thinking that we know the narrative. I know why this person is I know what's really going on. I hear that from supervisors all the time. So-and-so is making us think, I know what's really going on. Right? So change could mean a whole bunch of things for folks that we don't intend. Even positive change. Change might mean that you're asking somebody to leave knowledge behind that they're proud of. I learned, when we talk about positive change, we're going from program X that's glitchy and terrible and horrible, and we all hate it. We all decided that we hated it. We're moving to program Y that's wonderful and it's golden streets and everybody is going to enjoy it so much, but everybody who put the time in on program X is going to miss it, even if they hate it. Because change often means going to a space of uncertainty, leaving a space of surety and going to a space of uncertainty. And so people, even if it's a good space that they're getting ready to go to, there's a certain amount of unsureness and uncomfortability that you're asking them to deal with. And if you don't acknowledge that you're asking them to be uncomfortable, there may be some resistance. Change might mean somebody's perception of self shifts from confidence to self-doubt. I hear this fairly often when we talk about veteran staff. I've been doing it this way for 27 years. For 27 years, it's been great. Next week, you want me to do it a completely different way. Now I'm a new staff. I didn't get hired 27 years ago to feel like a new staff 3 decades in. Right? I don't want to feel that way. I hate feeling that way. This doesn't mean that I'm not going to learn it, but I want you to recognize that I have built my skills around this thing, and that thing is going away. And so I just need you to understand where I'm coming from, right? Regarding reading the read receipt, my emails don't automatically mark read when I open them. I have to manually mark them. I like that. I like the idea here. So that's another idea that we can use to bolster our communication strategies. But that I would definitely say, if you're implementing something like that, make sure that you talk it through with your team and give them the idea of purpose behind it. Right? It's very important to frame it well. When you are talking with somebody who displays resistance, you have to consider their purpose. Where are they coming from? Are they looking to be heard? Is this something to where I don't really want you to change anything? I just want you to know I don't like it. I get that. And sometimes I have seen many, many people in mediation spaces, they'll talk themselves all the way around. They'll tell you everything they hate and everything they don't like. And if you just sit and listen to them, they'll talk themselves around to accepting. And you go, okay, thanks so much. And they go, I really appreciate you for listening to me. I didn't do anything. I just sat here and stared at you while you complained your way into accepting what's new. Right? And sometimes you don't have to fight back. It's not a fight between you and them. It's a fight between them and themselves. Are they looking for further learning or support? Another thing that we do around change is the figure it out change. This is going to be different. Figure it out. It's not up to me. Right? You have to make this change. You have to implement this new thing. You have to do. And so if I feel unsupported, you're asking me to move to somewhere uncomfortable and I don't get any support, I'm going to resist you. So are you looking for support? Is that what this resistance is particularly about? And how can we empower each other to be that supportive space? Again, I thank Annette because Annette did a really good job of saying something that helped teach other people. Love that. Right? And that's what support is all about. Sometimes being able to just talk how I don't feel supported here and I feel like I need some extra learning or I feel like I need a place to start is incredibly important. Is there something underneath it? Are they at odds with something other than the change itself? So the change that they've gone through is concrete, it's very specific, and I've done everything, and I have this, when I do coaching stuff, I have people say this very often, Percy, I've done everything that I could, and this person is still resistant. I ask, what are they resistant? If you've done everything you could, what's the resistance? And most of the time, 9 times out of 10, they say, I don't know. I don't even know what we're arguing about anymore. This is a telling statement because it means both sides, we're no longer making points. Now we're just in a space where that's our relationship. Right? So how do we redefine that relationship when it comes to resistance? We might not even be talking about the point. It might be about how I talk to you and how you talk to me. And that's different than just change resistance, right? So there's some of that. I know it feels like I'm speeding. We got a couple minutes left. I know you have other things to get to, so I want to make sure that you get all this content. And again, you will have this available to you to go through. Feel free to email Zane May if there are some questions that you have or some elements you want clarified. I am all for it. Let's talk through it, okay? More about purpose. Do you need compliance or do you need buy-in? Do you need me to do what I'm asked, or do you need me to be excited about doing what I'm asked? Right? Buy-in is real different than compliance. I'll do it. I don't like it. Right? There are people, the fight won't stop them. No. I need you to endorse what's happening here. That's very different than I need you to comply. So think about your purpose. Are you here to get everybody to cheer the change, or are you here to get everybody to accept the change? Those are two very different things, right? What else is tied? Think about your authority. Think about the relationship prior to this change. If you go into a situation knowing that somebody is going to be resistant, the second that they raise their hand, you're already, here we go. Right? We have some of those folks in our office. Right? We have some of those people who we are already planning to fight with before they open their mouth. Right? So think about the relationship that you already have, and it may be that your purpose has changed your message. Is there an opportunity for mutual discussion, mutual understanding? If we come to understand each other a little bit better, is there a way that we can repair a resistant relationship? Sometimes change gives us that opportunity. And sometimes that transparency of talking about, here's what I need from you. I don't need you to high-five me after this. I just need you to do this as best as you can, and I will support you as best as I can. Right? That can change the relationship. It can resolve some misunderstanding. Okay, so we'll do a little bit of a review. We talked about change in a couple different ways. We talked about it in terms of change on the horizon. We talked about it change with a timeline. We talked about immediate change or effective immediate change. We've talked about considering purpose. We talked about impact. We talked about engagement. And we also talked about the medium that we use. Right? And it's incredibly important to be intentional about that medium. We've done a lot in this hour, and I have jam-packed it. So the only thing we have left is, what questions do you have? And sadly enough, I'm going to ask you to email me those questions, email Zane those questions, because I know you have other places to be. I'm going to turn it back over to Zane. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you on the next one.